The desert sun cast long shadows across the Nevada military base as it sank toward the horizon. Sarah Wells adjusted her thick glasses and wiped a bead of sweat from her brow as she hunched over the communications equipment inside Alpha Squad's command center. Even with the air conditioning running at full blast, the technical operations room felt stifling. No one paid much attention to her as she methodically worked through her system checks. Sarah was just another technician to them, the quiet girl who fixed their radios and kept their computers running. At 28, she was younger than most of the team, her small frame and nervous demeanor making her seem even more out of place among the hardened military personnel. Captain Richard Anderson, a 62-year-old veteran with silver hair and a weathered face that told stories of battles fought in Grenada and Desert Storm, nodded politely as he passed her station. His eyes sharp despite his age barely registered her presence. To him, she was just another piece of equipment that happened to wear a uniform. "Systems check complete, sir," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "All communications are functioning within normal parameters." "Good work," Anderson replied, his attention already elsewhere as he reviewed the intelligence reports coming in from across the globe. Alpha Squad's mission was straightforward, but vital: monitor potential terrorist threats and provide technical support for special operations. Their base in the Nevada desert was considered a low-risk posting far from any active conflict zones. Sarah watched as Sergeant Hayes entered the room, his broad shoulders and confident stride drawing the attention of everyone present. At 35, Hayes was the kind of soldier who commanded respect without effort, his combat experience in Iraq and Afghanistan giving him an air of authority that sometimes rivaled the captain's. "Still playing with your computers, Wells?" Hayes asked, a dismissive smile on his face as he passed her station. "Try not to break anything important." Sarah lowered her eyes, saying nothing. She had learned long ago that being invisible kept her safe. Growing up in the rough neighborhoods of Detroit, she had mastered the art of blending into the background. Her small frame and quiet demeanor made people assume she was harmless, which was exactly what she wanted them to think. But Sarah Wells had secrets that ran deeper than anyone could imagine. As the sun finally disappeared behind the mountains, casting the desert in darkness, Sarah completed her shift and gathered her personal items. Walking back to her quarters, she savored the cool night air on her skin. The base housed 12 members of Alpha Squad, and she was the newest addition, having transferred in 8 months ago. The others still treated her as an outsider, though Lieutenant Miller occasionally made efforts to include her in their card games or movie nights. Inside her small private quarters, Sarah carefully locked the door before retrieving a metal case from beneath her bunk. The case, officially listed in the inventory as containing spare communication parts, held something far more lethal: a custom-modified M24 sniper rifle disassembled into components that could be quickly assembled. Sarah ran her fingers over the cold metal parts with the familiarity of an old friend. No one on the base knew that before joining the military as a communications specialist, she had spent 5 years training in marksmanship, martial arts, and covert operations at a private facility in Montana. Her instructor, a retired general named James Blackwood, had seen something in the terrified teenager that others had missed. He had recognized a survivor with potential that far exceeded her circumstances. As Sarah prepared for bed, her mind drifted to the events that had led her to this moment, to this isolated base in the Nevada desert, playing the role of a timid technician while carrying the skills of a trained operative. It all began on a cold Detroit night in 1985 at the height of the Cold War, when Sarah was just 8 years old. Night settled over the Nevada base, but Sarah found sleep elusive. The past few days had brought strange patterns in the communications she monitored. Subtle anomalies that most would dismiss, but that triggered warning bells in her trained mind. Something wasn't right, and she could feel it in her bones, the same instinct that had kept her alive on the streets of Detroit and through years of dangerous training. As the clock ticked toward midnight, a distant sound caught her attention. Something metallic out of place. Sarah slid out of bed and moved to the window, her movements silent and practiced. In the moonlight, she could just make out a figure moving between buildings, a shadow that didn't belong. No one knew that Sarah Wells was already watching, already planning. No one could have guessed that the nervous communications technician would soon become the only thing standing between Alpha Squad and complete annihilation. No one realized that the quiet girl who jumped at loud noises would soon eliminate 50 trained killers without making a sound. Detroit, 1985. 8-year-old Sarah huddled in the corner of her family's kitchen, trying to make herself invisible, as her father argued with a man whose cold eyes seemed to see right through her. Her father, Michael Wells, worked for an import company, or so Sarah had always been told. But the tension in the room spoke of something far more dangerous than international shipping. The information is already secure, her father said, his voice steady despite the fear Sarah could sense radiating from him. Your people will never find it. The stranger smiled, a gesture devoid of warmth. The KGB always finds what it seeks, Mr. Wells. Or should I call you by your CIA designation? Sarah felt her world shift. Her father worked for the CIA. The revelation struck her with the force of a physical blow. The man she knew as her loving, ordinary father was something else entirely. My daughter has nothing to do with this, Michael said, glancing briefly at Sarah. Let her go upstairs. The daughter stays, the stranger replied, his Russian accent becoming more pronounced as his patience waned. She will ensure your cooperation. The events that followed would forever change the course of Sarah's life. 3 more men entered their home, their movements precise and military. Her father fought bravely, revealing combat skills Sarah had never imagined he possessed. But he was outnumbered and outgunned. The Russian man, who she would later learn was named Viktor Zakharov, personally executed her father with a single shot to the head while Sarah watched from her hiding place. The men searched the house, tearing apart furniture and breaking through walls, looking for something they never found. They would have killed Sarah too had fate not intervened in the form of James Blackwood, a tall, imposing man with silver hair who burst into the house with a team of operatives just as Zakharov was preparing to eliminate the final witness. In the chaos that followed, Zakharov escaped, but his men were neutralized. Sarah remembered Blackwood kneeling beside her, his weathered face softened with compassion as he gently lifted her from her hiding place. You're safe now, he had said, his voice deep and reassuring. I was your father's friend. He saved my life once in Berlin. I wish I could have returned the favor sooner. The official story became that Michael Wells was a victim of a home invasion. Sarah, with no living relatives, became a ward of the state. But James Blackwood kept a watchful eye on her, visiting regularly, ensuring she received the best care possible within the system. As Sarah grew older, her quiet demeanor and apparent fragility masked a burning need for answers and justice. When she turned 15, Blackwood approached her with an offer. Your father was one of the best operatives I ever knew, he told her during one of his visits. I see the same potential in you. If you want, I can train you. I can teach you to protect yourself and others. But the path is difficult, and once you start, there's no going back. Sarah accepted without hesitation. The next day, she disappeared from the foster system and resurfaced at a remote facility in Montana, officially listed as a therapeutic retreat for troubled youth. In reality, it was one of several unofficial training grounds for a CIA program so secretive that even most within the agency weren't aware of its existence. Ghost Protocol, Blackwood explained on her first day at the facility, a program designed to create operatives who can disappear in plain sight. Your father was one of the first. Now we're rebuilding the program off the books. The training was brutal. For 5 years, Sarah learned to move through darkness without making a sound, to take down opponents twice her size, and to handle weapons with deadly precision. Blackwood pushed her to her limits, both physically and mentally, until she became something entirely different from the frightened girl who had first walked into his facility. The best weapon is being underestimated, Blackwood told her repeatedly. Your size, your appearance, your quiet nature, these are not weaknesses. They are advantages. People who think you're weak will never see you coming. By the time Sarah turned 20, she could assemble and disassemble a dozen different weapons blindfolded. She could infiltrate secured buildings without triggering alarms. She could create new identities and blend into any environment. But most importantly, she had learned to control her fear and turn it into focus. Your father never completed his final mission, Blackwood told her on the day she completed her training. Zakharov escaped with partial information about American missile defense systems. He spent years building a terrorist organization called Black Eagle, dedicated to finishing what the KGB started. Your father died protecting the complete code sequence. We believe Zakharov is still looking for it. Sarah absorbed this information with the calm detachment she had cultivated over years of training. What happens now? Now, Blackwood said, you become a ghost. You enter the military through official channels as a communications specialist. Your skills make you a natural for the role. You build your cover identity, and you wait. For what? Sarah asked. Blackwood's eyes still sharp despite his advancing age met hers. For the moment when your father's killer resurfaces. Because he will, Sarah. Men like Zakharov always come back for what they believe is theirs. 3 years later, Sarah had completed her military training and established her cover as an unremarkable but competent communications specialist. She maintained regular secure contact with Blackwood, now retired from active service, but still connected to the intelligence community through a network of loyal former operatives. When the transfer to Alpha Squad came through, Sarah recognized it for what it was: a strategic placement. Alpha Squad's desert base housed more than just a monitoring station. It contained one of the most advanced communication arrays in the western United States, a vital link in the nation's missile defense network. If Zakharov and his Black Eagle organization were still hunting for the complete code sequence, this base would be a logical target. As Sarah unpacked her few belongings in her new quarters 8 months ago, she had felt a strange sense of destiny. The frightened child who had watched her father die was now positioned as the invisible protector of the very information he had given his life to secure. Now, lying awake in her bed and listening to the unusual movements outside her window, Sarah wondered if the moment Blackwood had prepared her for was finally arriving. Morning arrived with the harsh brightness unique to the desert. Sarah had slept only a few hours, her mind working through the anomalies she had noticed in the communication patterns over the past week. After her pre-dawn shower, she adjusted her uniform and carefully crafted her appearance hair, pulled back in a neat but unremarkable bun, glasses slightly too large for her face, and the nervous, slightly hunched posture that had become second nature in her role. The Technical Operations Center was already bustling when she arrived. Lieutenant Miller nodded to her as she took her station. "Morning, Wells. Captain wants a full system diagnostic today. Something about unusual signal patterns in the overnight logs." Sarah felt her pulse quicken, but kept her expression neutral. "Yes, sir, I noticed some anomalies yesterday as well. I was going to report them." "Good eye," Miller said, sounding mildly surprised. "Get me a full report by 1400 hours." As Miller walked away, Sarah began her work using the official diagnostic as cover for her own more thorough investigation. What most of Alpha Squad didn't know, what even Captain Anderson was only partially aware of, was that their base housed more than just standard monitoring equipment. Beneath the main complex, accessible only through a secure elevator requiring the highest clearance, lay a sophisticated NSA listening post. The Echelon system housed there was capable of intercepting and analyzing millions of communications from around the globe, filtering them through advanced algorithms designed to identify potential threats. Sarah's official clearance didn't grant her access to the subterranean facility, but her training under Blackwood had included advanced hacking techniques. From her standard terminal, she could glimpse shadows of the intelligence being gathered below, enough to confirm her suspicions. Someone was probing the base's defenses, testing its communication protocols with subtle digital touches that would go unnoticed by standard security measures. The pattern was sophisticated and patient, the hallmark of a professional operation. As she worked, Sarah also observed her colleagues with newfound attention. Sergeant Hayes spent an unusual amount of time near the communications array, often asking questions that seemed designed to map out the base's security protocols. Lieutenant Miller, always by the book, had been making late-night calls from the secure line calls that didn't appear in the official logs. Captain Anderson entered the operations center at precisely 0900 hours, his posture military straight despite his age. The Desert Storm veteran commanded respect from everyone on base, his tactical knowledge and leadership skills unquestioned. "Progress report," he demanded, stopping by Sarah's station. "Sir, I've isolated several anomalous communication packets," she replied, keeping her voice soft and slightly uncertain, the voice of a technician reporting findings rather than an operative presenting intelligence. "They appear to be probing our firewall architecture, possibly automated, but the pattern suggests human direction." Anderson frowned. "Cyber attacks happen all the time, Wells. What makes these different?" Sarah hesitated, calculating how much to reveal. "The targeting is precise, sir. They're focusing exclusively on our secure communication channels, particularly those connected to the missile defense network. And they're using outdated Soviet encryption methods, modified but recognizable." This last detail caught Anderson's attention. Soviet or you mean Russian? No, sir, specifically Soviet. Algorithms that haven't been used since 1991. Anderson's eyes narrowed. Show me everything you've found. And Wells, keep this between us for now. As Sarah displayed her findings, Anderson's expression grew increasingly grave. What she couldn't tell him was that she recognized these particular encryption methods because Blackwood had trained her to identify them. They were signature techniques used by Department 16, a specialized KGB unit that had supposedly been disbanded after the Soviet collapse. The same unit Viktor Zakharov had belonged to. I want hourly reports on any new anomalies, Anderson said finally, and I want you to work with Sergeant Hayes to strengthen our firewalls. Sarah nodded, concealing her concern at the mention of Hayes. Something about the sergeant had been troubling her for weeks. His questions were too specific, his interest in the communication systems too keen for someone whose expertise lay in combat operations. As Anderson walked away, Sarah returned to her analysis, diving deeper into the communication logs. What she found sent a chill down her spine. Hidden within the standard data packets were fragments of a more complex message broken apart and disguised as routine system noise. When assembled, they formed a message in a code she recognized from her training, a reference to Black Eagles and a date tomorrow. Sarah needed to contact Blackwood immediately, but doing so from the base would be too risky. She would have to wait until her shift ended and use the secure phone she kept hidden in her quarters. As she worked through the afternoon, Sarah became increasingly aware of Sergeant Hayes watching her. His usual dismissive attitude had been replaced by something more calculating, his eyes following her movements around the operations center with newfound interest. When their shifts finally ended, Sarah made her way to the mess hall, forcing herself to eat despite her lack of appetite. She needed to maintain her routine to avoid raising suspicions. Hayes sat several tables away, surrounded by other members of the squad, but she could feel his attention on her even as he laughed with his colleagues. Back in her quarters, Sarah secured the door, and retrieved her hidden phone, a specialized device Blackwood had given her that could establish a secure connection through encrypted satellite channels. The call connected after 3 rings. Blackwood, his voice though older now, still carried the same authoritative tone she remembered from her training days. Sir, we have activity, Sarah said quietly, using the coded language they had established. Blackbird circling, time frame immediate. There was a brief silence. Are you compromised? Uncertain. Possible internal asset identified. Name, Hayes, Sergeant Thomas Hayes, combat specialist transferred to Alpha Squad 14 months ago. Description. Sarah provided details, and she heard the sound of typing as Blackwood presumably ran the name through his databases. Hayes is clean on official channels, Blackwood said after a moment. But that means nothing if he's a ghost himself. Trust your instincts, Sarah. If you suspect him, maintain distance. Sir, the encryption methods are Department 16. Is it possible Zakharov is involved? Another pause, longer this time. Very possible. He's been off-grid for nearly 2 years. Intelligence suggested he was building resources for a major operation. If he's targeting Alpha Base, it's because of what's housed there. The Echelon system. More than that, the complete access codes for America's missile defense network are stored in a secure server beneath the base. It's what your father died protecting Sarah. The partial codes Zakharov obtained are useless without the complete sequence. Sarah's mind raced. The base is being targeted for those codes. We need to alert Captain Anderson. Carefully, Blackwood warned. If Hayes is compromised, revealing what you know could accelerate their timeline. Gather concrete evidence first. And if I can't, Blackwood's voice turned grim, then prepare for the worst. I'll activate our nearest assets, but they're at least 6 hours out. If an attack comes, you'll be on your own until then. After ending the call, Sarah sat on her bed, considering her options. Her training had prepared her for many scenarios, but standing alone against a potential assault by Zakharov's forces wasn't one she had anticipated so soon. She moved to the case beneath her bed and began assembling her rifle, her fingers moving with practiced precision. Whatever came next, she would not be unprepared. The following morning arrived with an unnatural stillness, as if the desert itself was holding its breath. Sarah had slept in her clothes, her hidden weapons within easy reach. She arrived at the operations center earlier than usual, determined to gather the evidence she needed before confronting Captain Anderson. The center was quiet, with only the night shift present as they prepared to hand over to the day crew. Sarah nodded to Corporal Jenkins, who looked relieved to see her. Early bird today. Wells. Couldn't sleep, she replied with a small smile. Thought I might as well get a head start on those anomalies. Jenkins yawned. Knock yourself out. Been quiet all night, though. Too quiet, Sarah thought. The probing attacks that had been escalating over the past week had suddenly ceased, a silence that concerned her more than the previous activity. It suggested preparation for something bigger. She logged into her station and began a deep scan of the system logs, looking for any trace of the encrypted messages she had intercepted yesterday. As expected, they had been professionally erased, leaving no trace in the official records. But Sarah had been trained to look beyond the obvious. Every digital intrusion left microscopic fingerprints, changes in file access, timestamps, memory allocation patterns, system cache residue. To the untrained eye, these were indistinguishable from normal system operations. To Sarah, they were a roadmap of unauthorized activity. She found what she was looking for in the backup logs, evidence of systematic probing of the base's defense systems, testing of response times, mapping of security protocols. Whoever was planning this attack now had a complete picture of Alpha Base's capabilities and vulnerabilities. Sarah compiled her findings into a report, translating the technical details into clear military language that Anderson would understand. She included her analysis of the probable attack vectors and the sophisticated nature of the reconnaissance, pointing specifically to the Soviet-era encryption methods as evidence of the attacker's identity. Just as she was preparing to take her findings to Anderson, Sergeant Hayes entered the operations center. His usual swagger was missing, replaced by a tense alertness that immediately put Sarah on guard. Wells, he said, stopping by her station. Captain wants all non-essential personnel at the briefing in 5 minutes. Sarah nodded, keeping her expression neutral, despite the alarm bells ringing in her mind. I'll be right there. Just need to finish this report. Hayes glanced at her screen, his eyes lingering a moment too long on her analysis. What report is that? System diagnostics, she lied smoothly. Those anomalies from yesterday. Anything serious? Sarah shrugged, adopting the slightly uncertain manner of her technician persona. Probably just system noise, but protocol requires a full report. Hayes nodded, seemingly satisfied. Well, leave it for now. Anderson doesn't like to be kept waiting. As Hayes walked away, Sarah quickly saved her report to a secure drive and locked her workstation. Something felt wrong about this sudden briefing. Anderson always scheduled meetings well in advance, his military precision extending to his administrative duties. The briefing room was already full when Sarah arrived. She took a seat near the back, her unassuming presence drawing little attention. Captain Anderson stood at the front, his expression grave. As of 0600 hours this morning, all leave has been canceled, he announced without preamble. We've received intelligence suggesting increased terrorist activity in the region. Until further notice, Alpha Base is moving to Security Level 3. Murmurs spread through the room. Security Level 3 meant restricted communications, additional patrols, and enhanced monitoring of the perimeter. It was a significant escalation from their normal operational status. Questions? Anderson asked, his tone indicating he expected few. Lieutenant Miller raised his hand. Sir, what's the nature of the threat? Anderson's eyes swept the room. That information is classified, Lieutenant. All you need to know is that we're taking it seriously. Sergeant Hayes will coordinate the increased security measures. Dismissed. As the briefing broke up, Sarah lingered, waiting for an opportunity to speak with Anderson privately. Hayes seemed to sense her intention, positioning himself near the captain and engaging him in conversation about the security protocols. Sarah decided to take a more direct approach. She moved forward, report in hand. Captain Anderson, sir, I have information relevant to the current situation. Anderson turned, his expression showing mild surprise at her assertiveness. What is it, Specialist Wells? Sir, I've compiled an analysis of the communication anomalies. There's evidence of a sophisticated reconnaissance operation targeting our systems. The encryption methods suggest involvement of former Soviet intelligence operatives, specifically Department 16. Hayes stiffened, his reaction almost imperceptible, but noted by Sarah's trained eye. Anderson frowned. Department 16, that unit was disbanded 30 years ago, Wells. Yes, sir, but their techniques are distinctive. I believe we're facing an imminent threat from a group called Black Eagle, led by a former KGB operative named Viktor Zakharov. The room fell silent. Hayes let out a short laugh, breaking the tension. With all due respect, sir, I think Specialist Wells has been watching too many Cold War spy movies. Department 16 Black Eagles. This sounds like fiction. Anderson's gaze shifted between Sarah and Hayes. What evidence do you have of this specific threat, Wells? Sarah handed him the report. Everything is documented here, sir. The intrusion patterns, the encrypted communications, I intercepted the Soviet signatures in the code. Anderson took the report but didn't open it. I appreciate your diligence, Specialist, but we already have intelligence on the current threat. Sergeant Hayes is right. This sounds rather fantastic. Sir, with respect, I believe Sergeant Hayes may be compromised, Sarah said, knowing she was taking a risk, but seeing no alternative. Hayes' face darkened. That's a serious accusation, Wells. Anderson held up a hand. Enough. Specialist Wells, these are extraordinary claims that require extraordinary evidence. I'll review your report, but in the meantime, please return to your duties. We have real security concerns to address. Sarah recognized the dismissal for what it was. Yes, sir. As she turned to leave, Hayes stepped closer to her, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Quite an imagination you have, Wells. Maybe you should stick to fixing radios and leave the real work to the professionals. Sarah maintained her technician persona, averting her eyes as if intimidated. Just doing my job, Sergeant. See that you do, Hayes replied, his tone carrying a subtle threat. Back at her workstation, Sarah monitored the increased security measures being implemented across the base. Additional guards were posted at key locations, perimeter patrols were doubled, and the communication systems were locked down to essential traffic only. On the surface, these appeared to be appropriate responses to a genuine threat. But Sarah noticed something concerning the increased security was focused entirely outward. Nothing was being done to address the possibility of an internal threat, a classic oversight that could prove fatal if Hayes was indeed compromised. Sarah used her lunch break to return to her quarters, where she quickly accessed her secure phone. It's happening today, she told Blackwood when he answered. Anderson has implemented security level 3, but he dismissed my warnings about Zakharov and Black Eagle, and I believe Hayes is definitely involved. What evidence did you find? Blackwood asked. His reaction when I mentioned Department 16 and Zakharov. It was subtle, but there was recognition there, followed by immediate deflection. Classic counterintelligence technique. Did you reveal your suspicions to Anderson? Yes, but he didn't take them seriously. Hayes has his trust. Blackwood was silent for a moment. Our assets are still hours away, Sarah. If an attack is imminent, you need to prepare for the worst-case scenario. I already am, she replied, glancing at her assembled rifle and the other equipment she had ready. But if Hayes is involved, the attack won't come from outside. They'll be let in. Then your priority is to secure the Echelon facility and the missile defense codes. Everything else is secondary. Sarah understood what he was saying. The lives of Alpha Squad, including her own, were expendable compared to the national security implications if those codes fell into Zakharov's hands. I understand, she said quietly. Be careful, Sarah, Blackwood added, his voice softening slightly. Your father would be proud of you. The rest of the afternoon passed in a tense calm. Sarah divided her attention between her official duties and covert observation of Hayes. The sergeant spent an unusual amount of time checking the perimeter security cameras and communication protocols. To anyone else, he appeared to be diligently implementing the enhanced security measures. To Sarah, he was methodically identifying blind spots and weaknesses. As evening approached, Sarah noticed Hayes making his way toward the secure communication room. She found a reason to follow, ostensibly carrying equipment for routine maintenance. The secure room was designed for classified communications, its walls shielded against electronic eavesdropping. Sarah positioned herself in an adjacent maintenance closet using a technique Blackwood had taught her to amplify sounds through the ventilation system. Hayes' voice came through clearly as he established a connection. Perimeter security has been enhanced, but internal systems remain vulnerable. Primary target is secured in sub-level 3 access restricted to alpha clearance only. A voice responded, distorted but recognizable enough to send a chill down Sarah's spine. The distinctive Russian accent belonged to a man she had not heard in 20 years but would never forget. The team is in position, Zakharov replied. Timing remains as planned, or 500 hours. Ensure the eastern sensor grid is disabled precisely at 455. Understood, Hayes confirmed. What about survivors? No witnesses, Zakharov stated coldly. Once we have the codes, the entire facility will be eliminated. Sarah had heard enough. She silently retreated from her hiding place, her mind racing. The attack would come at dawn, less than 12 hours from now. Hayes would disable key security systems, allowing Zakharov's team access to the base. Their target was the missile defense code stored in the Echelon facility. She needed to warn Anderson, but without Hayes discovering her intentions. She returned to the operations center, formulating a plan as she walked. She would need to create a diversion that would separate Hayes from Anderson long enough for her to present her evidence, including the recorded conversation she had just overheard. But as she entered the operations center, Sarah realized something was wrong. The atmosphere was tense, with personnel moving with unusual urgency. Captain Anderson stood at the central command station, his face grim, as he issued orders. "What's happening?" Sarah asked Lieutenant Miller, who was passing with a stack of reports. "Perimeter sensors detected movement on the western ridge," Miller replied. "Probably nothing, but with the elevated security level, we're checking everything." Sarah felt a spike of alarm. The western ridge was opposite from the eastern approach Zakharov had mentioned. This could be a diversion meant to draw attention and resources away from the actual attack vector. She glanced around the room and spotted Hayes near the communication console, his expression unreadable as he monitored the activity. Sarah made a decision. Maintaining her role as the timid technician, she approached Anderson directly, her posture submissive but determined. "Captain, I need to speak with you urgently, in private." Anderson looked irritated by the interruption. "This isn't a good time, Wells. Sir, it concerns the current security situation and Sergeant Hayes," she persisted, keeping her voice low. Anderson's expression hardened. "I reviewed your report, Specialist. Your theories about Soviet ghosts and compromised personnel are unfounded. We're dealing with a real situation here." "Sir, please." Sarah tried again, abandoning some of her facade and her urgency. "I have recorded evidence of Hayes communicating with the enemy. The movement on the western ridge is a diversion. The real attack will come from the east at 500 hours. Anderson stared at her, surprise at her sudden change in demeanor, quickly replaced by anger. "That's enough, Wells. Return to your station immediately or face disciplinary action." From the corner of her eye, Sarah saw Hayes watching their exchange with increased interest. She had revealed too much, pushed too hard, and now Hayes would know she was on to him. "Yes, sir," she replied, retreating to her workstation. The next few hours passed in excruciating slowness. The alert on the western ridge proved to be a false alarm, just as Sarah had suspected. A small group of wild horses had triggered the motion sensors, a common enough occurrence in the desert. As the base settled back into its vigilant waiting state, Sarah observed Hayes making a series of subtle but significant adjustments to the security protocols. To the untrained eye, he appeared to be enhancing their defenses. Sarah knew he was creating invisible gaps that would allow Zakharov's team to penetrate the perimeter undetected. Sarah needed a new plan. Anderson wouldn't listen to her, and confronting Hayes directly would only accelerate the timeline. She would have to take matters into her own hands. As her shift ended, Sarah returned to her quarters and began making final preparations. She changed from her uniform into dark clothing that would help her blend into shadows, then applied camouflage paint to her face and hands with practiced efficiency. She armed herself with her sniper rifle sidearm and combat knife, then added extra ammunition in a small medical kit to her gear. The transformation from nervous technician to trained operative took less than 5 minutes. When she looked in the mirror, a different person stared back at her. Gone was the timid specialist who jumped at loud noises. In her place stood a ghost, a hunter, a predator prepared for the coming storm. Sarah checked the time, 2,300 hours. Still 6 hours until the attack was scheduled to begin. She would use that time to position herself where she could monitor the eastern perimeter without being detected. When Zakharov's team arrived, they would find not the easy target they expected, but a defender they never saw coming. As she prepared to leave her quarters, Sarah allowed herself one moment of reflection. Tomorrow, either she would stop Zakharov and his Black Eagle organization, or she would die trying. Either way, the shy technician known as Sarah Wells would cease to exist. Her cover maintained for years would be blown the moment she took action against the attackers. But in that moment, Sarah found she didn't care. The mission her father had died for was now hers to complete. The enemy he had fought was now hers to defeat. And if Captain Anderson and the rest of Alpha Squad never knew who had saved them, that would be fine too. After all, Blackwood had taught her well, the best victories are the ones where no one ever knows you were there. Sarah slipped out of her quarters and into the desert night, a ghost preparing for war. The countdown to 0500 hours had begun. The desert night embraced Sarah as she moved silently across the base perimeter. Years of training under Blackwood had taught her to become one with shadows, her footsteps leaving barely a trace in the sand. The temperature had dropped significantly, a blessing that would help mask her heat signature from any thermal imaging equipment the attackers might employ. Sarah positioned herself on a small ridge overlooking the eastern approach to the base. From this vantage point, she could observe both the perimeter sensors Hayes would disable and the likely infiltration route Zakharov's team would use. The rocky terrain provided excellent natural cover while giving her clear lines of sight to critical areas. Through her scope, she watched as the base settled into its night routine. Guards patrolled in predictable patterns, their increased numbers providing an illusion of security that Sarah knew would prove fatal once Hayes disabled key systems. She noted each guard position, each camera blind spot, mentally mapping the weaknesses that Zakharov would exploit. The moon hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the desert landscape. In the distance, the silhouettes of mountains stood like silent sentinels against the star-filled sky. Under different circumstances, Sarah might have appreciated the stark beauty of the scene. Tonight she saw only terrain cover, lines of fire, and potential threats. Sarah checked her watch, 0100 hours. 4 hours until the attack. She settled into the patient stillness that Blackwood had drilled into her during countless training exercises. The ability to remain motionless for hours, maintaining complete focus while controlling every bodily function, from heart rate to breathing, separated professionals from amateurs in her line of work. The enemy gets lazy when nothing happens, Blackwood had told her repeatedly. Your advantage lies in staying sharp when everyone else lets their guard down. As she maintained her vigil, Sarah's mind drifted briefly to her father. Would he recognize the woman she had become? The frightened child who had witnessed his execution was now a trained operative preparing to face his killer. There was a symmetry to it that felt almost predestined. Movement near the eastern perimeter snapped her attention back to the present. A figure was walking the fence line, inspecting the sensor equipment. Even from this distance, Sarah recognized Sergeant Hayes. He was early, perhaps making final preparations before the main event. Sarah adjusted her rifle scope, zooming in on Hayes as he methodically worked his way along the perimeter. He was careful, she had to give him that. To casual observation, he appeared to be checking the equipment, ensuring everything functioned properly. But Sarah's trained eye caught the subtle manipulations, the careful adjustments that would render the sensors blind to approaching threats. She considered taking the shot. Hayes was betraying everyone on the base, setting them up for slaughter. With him eliminated, the attack might be compromised or at least delayed until Blackwood's reinforcements could arrive. Her finger hovered near the trigger, the ethical calculation running through her mind with cold precision. One life versus dozens. A traitor's death versus the potential massacre of innocent personnel. But the tactical assessment overrode the immediate impulse. Eliminating Hayes now would alert Zakharov that his operation was compromised. The attack would likely proceed anyway, but without the advantage of surprise on either side. Better to let Hayes complete his sabotage, maintaining the illusion that everything was proceeding according to Zakharov's plan. Sarah lowered her rifle slightly, continuing to observe as Hayes finished his work and returned to the main building. He moved with the confidence of a man who believed his actions were unobserved. That confidence would be his undoing. The hours crept by with glacial slowness. Sarah remained motionless, her body acclimated to the discomfort through years of training. At 0400 hours, she detected the first signs of the approaching threat. They were good, she had to admit. Moving in small groups of 2 and 3, using the natural terrain for cover, maintaining strict communication discipline. From her elevated position, Sarah counted at least 20 figures approaching from the east, with more likely hidden by the rolling terrain. Their movements were synchronized and professional, suggesting military training. These weren't random terrorists. They were special forces, likely former Spetsnaz or similar units recruited by Zakharov for their specialized skills. Sarah felt a momentary flicker of doubt. Even with her training, taking on this many highly trained operatives seemed almost impossible. Almost. At precisely 0455 hours, Sarah watched as the perimeter sensors on the eastern fence blinked out. Hayes had done his job perfectly. The electronic eyes of Alpha Base were now blind to the approaching threat. The infiltration team moved immediately, converging on the now vulnerable section of fence. They worked with practiced efficiency, cutting through the chain link barrier and creating an opening large enough for their entire force to move through undetected. Sarah remained still, counting operatives as they passed through the breach. 47 by her final count, plus Zakharov himself would make 48. There were likely more in reserve positions or handling transportation, bringing the total force close to the 50 Blackwood had estimated. It was time. Sarah checked her rifle one final time, then targeted the communications specialist in the rear of the formation. The man was carrying a sophisticated electronic warfare package designed to jam any emergency transmissions from the base once the attack began. Taking him out first would preserve at least some of Alpha Base's communication capabilities. Sarah controlled her breathing, waiting for the perfect moment when the target paused to adjust his equipment. The shot, when it came, was almost silent thanks to the advanced suppressor on her rifle. Through her scope, she watched the communications specialist drop without a sound, the precision shot finding the base of his skull exactly as intended. The rest of the infiltration team continued forward, unaware that they had just lost a key asset. Sarah immediately shifted her aim to the next high-value target, a man carrying what appeared to be explosives. Another shot, another silent elimination. 2 down, 46 to go. Sarah changed position immediately, using the rocks and shadows to move 30 yards to her right before the enemy could identify her location. The infiltration team had now split into smaller units, each heading towards specific objectives within the base. The largest group, led by a tall figure Sarah suspected was HYN Petrov, was moving toward the main building, where most of Alpha Squad would be sleeping. Another unit headed for the communications center, while a third approached the power generators. Tactically sound: disable communications, cut power, then eliminate resistance. It was exactly what Sarah would have done in their position. She targeted the generator team next, taking out their leader with another precision shot. This time, the team noticed their comrade falling. They immediately took defensive positions, scanning for the threat, but seeing nothing in the pre-dawn darkness. Sarah was already moving again, circling to approach from a different angle. The brief hesitation as the enemy sought her position gave her the opportunity to eliminate 2 more of the generator team before they could complete their mission. 5 down. But now the element of surprise was fading. The remaining infiltrators were on high alert, communicating with hand signals and deploying in defensive formations that made clean shots more difficult. Sarah knew she needed to change tactics. She slung her rifle and moved closer to the base, using the same breach in the fence that the infiltration team had created. Once inside the perimeter, she switched to her sidearm, a more appropriate weapon for the closer quarters she would now be fighting in. The first explosion rocked the base at 05:15 hours. Despite Sarah's elimination of several key operatives, the remaining infiltrators had successfully planted charges on one of the secondary generators. Lights flickered across the compound as emergency systems engaged. Alarms began to sound, their wailing cutting through the pre-dawn silence. Alpha Squad would be waking to chaos, with enemy forces already inside the perimeter and more moving in by the second. Sarah moved toward the communications center, knowing it would be a primary target. If the base could get a distress signal, Blackwood's reinforcements might arrive sooner than planned. She encountered 2 infiltrators moving along the same path and eliminated them with silent efficiency, her knife finding vital points before either man could raise an alarm. 7 down. The sound of gunfire erupted from the main barracks area. Alpha Squad was engaging the infiltrators, but they were at a severe disadvantage, woken from sleep to find enemies already inside their secure perimeter. Sarah reached the communications building just as a team of 4 infiltrators was preparing to breach the entrance. She took cover behind a nearby vehicle, assessing the situation. The team was heavily armed and wearing body armor, making quick elimination more challenging. She opted for distraction. Retrieving a flash grenade from her equipment, Sarah tossed it precisely into the midst of the infiltration team. The disorienting blast of light and sound achieved its purpose, leaving the men momentarily blind and confused. Sarah moved immediately, her sidearm finding gaps in their armor with surgical precision. 3 went down before they could recover. The 4th managed to fire a burst in her direction, forcing her to roll behind cover. The rounds impacted the vehicle she had been using for concealment, puncturing the fuel tank. Gasoline began pooling beneath the vehicle, creating both a hazard and an opportunity. Sarah fired a single shot into the expanding pool. The flash of ignition was immediate flames engulfing the area and forcing the remaining infiltrator to break cover. As he ran from the growing fire, Sarah's bullet found him. 8, 9, 10, 11 down. Inside the communications building, Sarah found two Alpha Squad technicians already dead, their bodies crumpled beside their workstations. Hayes had been here ahead of her, eliminating the personnel most likely to get a distress signal out. Sarah moved quickly to the main console, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she initiated an emergency protocol call that Blackwood had taught her. The system responded, establishing a secure burst transmission that would send Alpha Base's coordinates and an attack code to Blackwood's network. The message sent Sarah turned her attention to the next priority, locating Hayes and preventing him from giving Zakharov access to the subterranean echelon facility. She exited the communications building to find the base now fully engulfed in battle. Gunfire echoed across the compound as Alpha Squad fought desperately against the overwhelming force that had breached their defenses. Explosions punctuated the gunfire as more charges detonated, systematically destroying key infrastructure. Through the chaos, Sarah moved like a phantom, using the growing smoke and confusion to mask her movements. She eliminated 3 more infiltrators as she made her way toward the main building, where the secure elevator to the echelon facility was located. 14 down, 34 to go. As Sarah approached the main building, she spotted Captain Anderson leading a counterattack against a group of infiltrators who had taken position near the armory. Despite his age, Anderson was fighting with the skill and determination of a man half his years, his combat experience evident in every move he made. Sarah provided covering fire, her precise shots taking down 2 infiltrators who were attempting to flank Anderson's position. The captain glanced in her direction, momentary confusion crossing his features as he tried to identify the mysterious ally in the pre-dawn darkness. Sarah didn't wait for recognition. She was already moving again, using the distraction of the main battle to approach her primary objective. 16 down. Inside the main building, the signs of Hayes' betrayal were everywhere. Bodies of Alpha Squad personnel lay where they had fallen, many shot in the back or while sleeping. This wasn't combat, it was execution. Sarah felt cold anger building within her, a focused rage that sharpened rather than clouded her senses. Hayes would pay for this betrayal, but first she needed to secure the echelon facility. The secure elevator required Alpha-level clearance, which Sarah didn't possess. But Blackwood had prepared her for such obstacles. From her equipment, she retrieved a specialized electronic bypass device and attached it to the elevator's security panel. As the device worked to override the security protocols, Sarah heard footsteps approaching. She took cover behind a nearby desk, her sidearm ready. Hayes entered the room, accompanied by 2 infiltrators. His uniform was spotless, untouched by the battle raging outside, a stark contrast to the blood-spattered clothing of his companions. Zakharov wants the access codes now, one of the infiltrators said, his accent heavily Russian. The Americans are putting up more resistance than expected. Hayes nodded. The elevator security is more complex than anticipated. I need a few more minutes to bypass the final protocols. They moved toward the elevator, unaware of Sarah's presence or the bypass device already attached to the panel. As they reached the elevator, the device completed its work, the security panel blinking green as the doors slid open. Hayes looked momentarily confused, then alarmed. "Someone's already here," he said, reaching for his weapon. Sarah didn't give him the chance. She emerged from cover, her sidearm already aimed. Her first shots had eliminated the 2 infiltrators before they could react. Hayes managed to dive behind a nearby column, returning fire with trained precision. "I knew there was something off about you, Wells," he called out, his voice eerily calm despite the situation. "Too quiet, too observant. Who are you really?" Sarah didn't respond, moving silently to flank his position. Hayes continued, perhaps hoping to distract her or draw her into revealing her location. "Zakharov said there might be a CIA operative embedded at Alpha. I should have looked closer at your background." His words confirmed what Sarah had suspected. Hayes wasn't just a traitor. He was a plant specifically positioned to facilitate this attack. The betrayal ran deeper than she had imagined. Sarah circled the room, using the furniture and columns for cover as she closed in on Hayes' position. A flash of movement gave her the opening she needed. Her shot caught Hayes in the shoulder, spinning him out of cover. He recovered quickly, returning fire as he scrambled toward the open elevator. Sarah pursued, knowing she couldn't allow him to reach the Echelon facility. Her next shot caught Hayes in the leg, sending him crashing to the floor just short of the elevator doors. Hayes rolled onto his back, his weapon still gripped in his hand, but now trained on the elevator's control panel rather than on Sarah. "It's too late," he said, a smile spreading across his face despite his injuries. "Zakharov is already inside." He pulled the trigger, his bullets destroying the elevator controls in a shower of sparks. The doors began to close automatically as the system initiated emergency protocols. Sarah lunged forward, diving through the narrowing gap just before the doors sealed completely. She landed hard on the elevator floor, quickly rolling to a defensive position, but Hayes hadn't made it inside. He remained in the outer room, his laughter audible through the damaged doors as the elevator began its descent. 17 down. But if Hayes was telling the truth, Sarah was now heading directly towards Zakharov himself. The elevator moved smoothly downward despite the damaged controls, the emergency systems functioning as designed. Sarah used the brief respite to reload her weapon and check her equipment. The fight was far from over. The elevator slowed as it approached the subterranean level, finally coming to a stop with a soft chime. The doors opened to reveal a state-of-the-art facility, its walls lined with servers and monitoring equipment. The Echelon system, heart of America's global surveillance network and guardian of the missile defense codes. The facility appeared deserted at first glance, the regular staff either eliminated or evacuated during the initial stages of the attack. Sarah moved cautiously into the main control room, her senses alert for any sign of Zakharov or his men. She found the first body near the primary server bank. A technician, his security badge still clipped to his shirt, a single bullet hole precisely placed in the center of his forehead. The work of a professional. Movement reflected in one of the monitoring screens caught Sarah's attention. She turned just in time to see a figure emerging from behind a server rack, weapon already aimed in her direction. Sarah dove for cover as bullets tore through the space she had occupied a moment before. Rolling behind a workstation, she returned fire, forcing her attacker to retreat. "I know you're there, little ghost," a voice called out, the Russian accent unmistakable. "Hayes told me someone was interfering with my operation. I did not expect it would be a woman. Ivan Petrov, Zakharov's right-hand man, and the one who had pulled the trigger on her father 20 years ago." Sarah felt a surge of cold focus at the sound of his voice. "Your men are falling outside," she replied, keeping her voice steady as she repositioned. "Your operation is compromised." Petrov laughed, the sound echoing off the facility's walls. "A temporary setback. Once we have the codes, none of that will matter. America's missile defense system will be blind, and Zakharov's vision will be realized." Sarah moved silently between workstations, trying to pinpoint Petrov's location by the sound of his voice. He was doing the same the hunter and hunted, circling each other in the dimly lit facility. "Tell me, Ghost," Petrov continued. "Who trained you? Your skills are impressive." Sarah remained silent, knowing that each word would help Petrov locate her. She caught a reflection in one of the darkened monitors showing Petrov moving along the far wall of servers. "No matter," he said when she didn't respond. "You will die here like your colleagues above." Sarah waited until Petrov passed behind a large server bank, then moved quickly to approach from his blind side. She rounded the corner, weapon ready, but found only empty space. Petrov had anticipated her move. The blow came from above Petrov, dropping from his perch atop the server rack. Sarah barely managed to roll with the impact, avoiding the worst of the damage, but losing her grip on her sidearm. The weapon skittered across the floor, coming to rest out of immediate reach. Petrov pressed his advantage, driving a vicious kick towards Sarah's midsection. She blocked, deflecting the force, then countered with a strike to his knee. Petrov grunted in pain but remained upright, a smile spreading across his scarred face. "Good technique," he acknowledged. "American military, no, too refined. Private training, perhaps." Sarah didn't waste breath on a response. She moved in close, negating Petrov's size advantage, striking at vulnerable points with precision born of years of practice. Throat, solar plexus, knee. Each blow landing with calculated force. But Petrov was no amateur. He absorbed the attacks, countering with brutal efficiency. A strike to Sarah's ribs sent a flash of pain through her body. Another caught her shoulder, numbing her left arm momentarily. They separated, circling each other in the confined space between server banks. Sarah could see that despite his confident demeanor, Petrov was favoring his right leg where her strike had landed. She had hurt him. Not enough, but it was a start. "You fight well for such a small woman," Petrov said, his breathing slightly labored. "But Zakharov is already accessing the main server. You're too late." Sarah saw movement reflected in the servers behind Petrov. Another operative was approaching from the far side of the room. She was about to be caught in a crossfire. Making a split-second decision, Sarah charged directly at Petrov. The unexpected frontal assault caught him off guard. She drove her shoulder into his midsection, using his own weight against him as Blackwood had taught her. Petrov stumbled backward, colliding with the approaching operative. Both men went down in a tangle of limbs. Sarah used the momentary confusion to dive for her sidearm, her fingers closing around the grip, just as Petrov regained his footing. Two shots in rapid succession. The second operative went down immediately, a neat hole appearing in the center of his forehead. Petrov moved with inhuman speed, finding cover behind a server rack as Sarah's second shot missed by millimeters. 18 down. "Impressive reflexes," Petrov called out, genuine appreciation in his voice. "You remind me of someone I killed many years ago, a CIA operative in Detroit." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Petrov was baiting her, but the mention of her father still struck a nerve. She forced the emotional response down, focusing on the tactical situation. "He died protecting something," Petrov continued, "just as you will die here today. History repeats itself, does it not?" Sarah moved silently along the perimeter of the room, working her way toward the main server where Zakharov would be attempting to access the missile defense codes. Petrov's voice followed her, bouncing off the walls of the facility. "Perhaps you knew him. Michael Wells was his name. He died bravely, I will give him that." Sarah froze momentarily at the mention of her father's name. How could Petrov know unless— "Yes, little ghost. We know who you are, Sarah Wells, daughter of Michael, student of James Blackwood, the last graduate of the Ghost Protocol program." Her cover was completely blown. Somehow Zakharov had identified her despite years of careful concealment. The revelation was shocking, but there was no time to process its implications. The mission remained the same: protect the codes, eliminate the threat. Sarah reached the entrance to the main server room where the most sensitive data was stored. Through the glass partition, she could see a figure working at the central terminal. Not Zakharov himself, but another operative, this one in civilian clothes rather than tactical gear. A technical specialist brought specifically to breach the final security measures protecting the missile defense codes. She took aim through the glass, but before she could fire, pain exploded in her side. Petrov had circled around his shot, catching her just below the ribs. Sarah fell to one knee, warm blood seeping through her clothing. Petrov approached, weapon trained on her head. A valiant effort, daughter of Wells, but futile. Sarah's vision blurred from the pain, but her mind remained clear. She had been trained for this, prepared to function despite injury. As Petrov came closer, preparing to deliver the killing shot, Sarah triggered the small explosive device she had placed on the server rack during their earlier struggle. The blast was contained but powerful enough to shower Petrov with debris and temporarily blind him. Sarah moved through the pain, her knife finding its target in Petrov's thigh, slicing through the femoral artery with surgical precision. Petrov's cry of pain was cut short as Sarah's second strike caught him in the throat, crushing his windpipe. He dropped to his knees, eyes wide with shock, blood pulsing from his leg wound in diminishing spurts as his heart failed. "For my father," Sarah whispered as Petrov collapsed. 19 down. Sarah pressed a hand against her own wound, applying pressure to slow the bleeding. The bullet had passed through her side, missing vital organs, but causing significant blood loss. She wouldn't have long before shock set in. Using the wall for support, Sarah moved toward the main server room, where Zakharov's technical specialist was still working, unaware of Petrov's fate. Through the glass, she could see that he was close to breaking through the final security protocols. Sarah raised her weapon, took aim, and fired. The specialist slumped forward over the keyboard, the back of his head a ruined mess. 20 down. Sarah staggered into the room, pushing the dead specialist aside to assess the damage. The terminal showed that the security protocols were still intact, the code still protected. She had stopped the breach just in time. A slow clapping sound from the doorway froze her in place. "Impressive, Ms. Wells, truly impressive." The voice was older than in her memories, but still carried the same cold authority that had haunted her nightmares for 20 years. Sarah turned slowly, her weapon raised despite the trembling that had begun to overtake her limbs. Viktor Zakharov stood in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the light from the outer facility. At 65, he remained an imposing figure, his silver hair cropped short in military fashion, his face a roadmap of lines and scars that spoke of a lifetime of violence. "You have cost me many good men today," he said, stepping into the room. Unlike his operatives, he wore no tactical gear, just an expensive suit that seemed incongruous in the current setting. "Men not easily replaced." "Like Petrov?" Sarah asked, her voice steady despite the pain radiating from her wound. Zakharov glanced at Petrov's body visible through the doorway, his expression showing only mild disappointment. "A valuable asset, but ultimately replaceable. Like your father was to the CIA." The casual dismissal of both her father and Petrov spoke volumes about Zakharov's character. People were tools to him, nothing more. "The codes remain secure," Sarah said, nodding toward the terminal. "Your operation has failed." Zakharov smiled, the expression never reaching his cold eyes. "This operation, perhaps, but there will be others. The war your father and I began did not end with the Soviet Union, Ms. Wells. It merely evolved." He took another step forward, seeming unconcerned by the weapon Sarah still held trained on him. "You are bleeding quite heavily. Your reactions will slow soon. Your aim will falter. And then, what will you do?" He was right. Sarah could feel her strength ebbing with each heartbeat, the blood loss taking its toll, despite her training and determination. She needed to end this now. "Why did you kill him?" she asked, the question that had burned within her for 20 years finally finding voice. Zakharov seemed almost surprised by the query. "Your father, he was an enemy operative in possession of information vital to Soviet interests. It was nothing personal." "It was personal to me," Sarah replied, her finger tightening on the trigger. "Of course," Zakharov acknowledged with a slight nod, "just as killing me would be personal for you now. But it would not bring him back, nor would it end the larger conflict. Others will continue my work just as you continued your father's." Sarah's vision blurred slightly, the edges darkening as her body fought against the blood loss. Zakharov noticed his posture shifting subtly as he prepared to take advantage of her weakening condition. "Your father died protecting those codes," Zakharov continued. "Are you prepared to do the same?" "Yes," Sarah answered without hesitation. Zakharov's hand moved with surprising speed for a man his age, producing a small pistol from within his jacket. But Sarah had been anticipating the move. Despite her injuries, her shot came first, catching Zakharov in the chest. The Russian staggered backward, genuine surprise registering on his face for the first time. He looked down at the spreading crimson stain on his expensive suit, then back up at Sarah. "Well played, daughter of Wells," he said, his voice suddenly weaker. "But this game is far from over." Zakharov slumped against the door frame, his pistol clattering to the floor unfired. His eyes remained fixed on Sarah, a final message in them that she couldn't quite decipher before the light faded from his gaze. 21 down, including the architect of her father's murder. Sarah collapsed into the chair at the terminal, the adrenaline that had kept her going finally ebbing away. Above her, the sounds of battle continued, but they seemed distant now, almost irrelevant. She had completed her mission. The codes were secure. Zakharov was dead. Her vision darkened further as blood continued to seep between her fingers, despite her best efforts to maintain pressure on the wound. She was going into shock, her body finally surrendering to the trauma it had endured. As consciousness began to slip away, Sarah heard the elevator doors opening in the distance. Reinforcements. Zakharov's remaining operatives, she couldn't tell, and found that she no longer had the strength to care. Her last thought before darkness claimed her was of her father. Would he be proud of what she had become? Of what she had done in his name? She hoped so. The darkness was warm and comforting, free of pain and responsibility. Sarah floated in it, feeling a peace she hadn't known since childhood. Was this death? It seemed gentler than she had expected. A voice penetrated the darkness, familiar and insistent. "Sarah, stay with me, Sarah." Blackwood. How was that possible? Hands pressed against her wound, applying pressure more effectively than she had managed. Sharp pain cut through the comfortable darkness as pulling her back toward consciousness against her will. "That's it, girl. Fight. Your father never gave up, and neither will you." Sarah's eyes fluttered open to find James Blackwood leaning over her, his weathered face tight with concern. Despite his 79 years, his hands worked with steady precision as he applied a field dressing to her wound. "Be Blackwood," she managed, her voice barely audible. "Save your strength," he replied, continuing his work. "Our extraction team is securing the facility now. The remaining hostiles are being neutralized or have retreated." Sarah tried to focus, the tactical part of her brain still functioning despite her condition. "Hayes? Captured alive," Blackwood confirmed. "Anderson's men found him trying to escape in the confusion. He'll provide valuable intelligence on what remains of Zakharov's network." "Zakharov," Sarah mumbled. "He's dead. I killed him." Blackwood's hands paused momentarily, his surprise registering in his eyes. "You're certain?" Sarah nodded weakly toward the doorway, where Zakharov's body lay slumped. Blackwood followed her gaze, then nodded with grim satisfaction. "Well done," he said simply. The words held more weight coming from him than any elaborate praise could have. Sarah felt a sense of completion wash over her. The mission her father had died for was truly finished now. The circle was closed. "How many casualties?" she asked, her professional training reasserting itself even in her weakened state. "Too many," Blackwood admitted. "But thanks to your intervention, Alpha Base wasn't completely overrun. Anderson and about half his personnel survived. Without you, it would have been a total loss." Sarah processed this information slowly. She had saved lives, but others had still died. Hayes's betrayal had been too thorough, the attack too well planned for a complete victory. "Anderson knows about me now," she said, the realization that her cover was irreparably blown finally sinking in. Blackwood nodded. "Your Ghost Protocol identity is compromised, but we prepared for this eventuality. We have a new identity ready for when you are recovered." The thought of starting over, of building another cover identity after years of being Sarah Wells, should have been daunting. Instead, Sarah felt an unexpected sense of liberation. The quiet technician had never been more than a shell, a necessary fiction to accomplish her mission. Now perhaps she could become someone new, someone of her own choosing. "There will be questions," she said, thinking of the official investigation that would surely follow such a significant breach of security. "Let me worry about that," Blackwood replied. "For now, your only job is to survive." Medical personnel arrived, taking over from Blackwood with professional efficiency. As they transferred Sarah to a stretcher, she caught a last glimpse of Zakharov's body being examined by Blackwood's operatives. The man who had haunted her nightmares for 20 years was gone. The ghost that had driven her throughout her training, that had shaped her entire adult life, was finally exorcised. Yet instead of triumph, Sarah felt a strange emptiness. What would define her now? As the medical team carried her toward the elevator, Sarah caught Blackwood's eye. The old man seemed to read her thoughts, as he so often had during her training. "This isn't the end, Sarah," he said quietly. "It's a beginning." The elevator doors closed, carrying Sarah away from the subterranean facility and toward an uncertain future. The battle at Alpha Base was over, but she sensed that her war was just beginning. Zakharov's final words echoed in her mind. This game is far from over. How right he had been. In the chaos above ground, Captain Richard Anderson fought with the desperation of a man who knew he was outmaneuvered but refused to accept defeat. The pre-dawn darkness had given way to the first light of morning, illuminating a battlefield that had once been a secure military installation. Bodies lay scattered across the compound, both Alpha Squad personnel and Zakharov's infiltrators. Fires burned in several buildings, sending plumes of black smoke into the desert sky. The communications center was a twisted wreck of metal and concrete, hit by one of the larger explosive charges on early in the assault. Anderson had managed to rally the surviving members of his squad behind the armory, using the reinforced structure as a defensive position. Lieutenant Miller lay wounded but still fighting, coordinating their dwindling ammunition supply with grim efficiency. "Where the hell is our air support?" Miller asked, reloading his weapon with blood-stained hands. "Communications are down," Anderson replied, his voice steady despite the dire situation. "We're on our own." The attackers had established positions around the armory, settling into a siege pattern that suggested they were content to wait out the defenders. Occasionally, bursts of gunfire would pepper the armory walls, but no serious assault had materialized in the past 20 minutes. Anderson found this change in tactics concerning. The initial attack had been aggressive and direct, aimed at overwhelming Alpha Base through speed and violence of action. This sudden shift to containment suggested a change in objective. They're waiting for something, he told Miller, or someone. As if in response to his observation, Anderson noticed movement among the attackers. Several were falling back, abandoning their positions and retreating toward the perimeter. Others seemed to be receiving new orders, their posture changing from offensive to defensive. "What's happening?" Miller asked, noticing the same shift. Before Anderson could respond, the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors cut through the battlefield noise. Not one helicopter, but several approaching rapidly from the west. "Reinforcements," Miller suggested, hope evident in his voice. Anderson raised his field binoculars, focusing on the approaching aircraft. "Not ours," he said grimly. "No markings." The unmarked black helicopters swept in low over the base, their door gunners immediately engaging the remaining infiltrators with precision fire. To Anderson's astonishment, the attackers were being targeted, not his own men. "Who the hell are these guys?" Miller asked, watching through a broken window as the mysterious force systematically eliminated the remaining hostiles. Anderson had no answer, but years of military experience told him he was watching a professional extraction operation. Someone had sent a private military force to clean up the situation, and they were doing so with ruthless efficiency. Within minutes, the remaining infiltrators were either dead or in full retreat, abandoning their siege of the armory and fleeing toward their own extraction points. The black helicopters landed in the central clearing, disgorging teams of heavily armed operatives who moved with the discipline and coordination of special forces. Anderson made a decision. "Hold fire," he ordered his men. "Let's see what they want." A lone figure approached the armory, hands visible, and weapon holstered, clearly signaling peaceful intent. As the man drew closer, Anderson felt a jolt of recognition despite never having met him before. James Blackwood's reputation preceded him. The legendary Cold War operative turned private security consultant was known in certain military circles, though few had ever seen him in person. His appearance at Alpha Base, leading what was clearly a private military force, raised more questions than it answered. "Captain Anderson," Blackwood called out, stopping at a respectful distance from the armory entrance. "Your base has been compromised by Russian operatives led by Viktor Zakharov. My team is here to assist with neutralizing the threat and extracting sensitive intelligence." Anderson emerged cautiously from the armory, his weapon lowered but ready. Under whose authority? Blackwood produced an identification card that made Anderson's eyebrows rise in surprise. Despite being officially retired, Blackwood apparently retained connections at the highest levels of government. "The situation is contained," Blackwood continued. "Zakharov is dead. We've secured the Echelon facility and the missile defense codes. Your Sergeant Hayes has been detained as a collaborator." The news hit Anderson like a physical blow. Hayes, his most trusted NCO, a traitor. The Echelon facility compromised. It was almost too much to process. "How did you know about the attack?" Anderson demanded, suspicion evident in his voice. Blackwood's expression remained impassive. "We've been tracking Zakharov for years. One of our operatives was embedded at Alpha Base and alerted us when the attack began." Anderson's mind raced, reviewing the personnel under his command. Who could have been Blackwood's operative? The realization when it came was almost unbelievable. "Wells," he asked, disbelief evident in his tone. "Sarah Wells, my communications specialist." Blackwood neither confirmed nor denied his silence answer enough. "Where is she now?" Anderson pressed. "Being treated for injuries sustained protecting your base and this country's missile defense network," Blackwood replied, a hint of steel entering his voice. "She eliminated 21 hostiles single-handedly, including Zakharov himself, and prevented a catastrophic breach of national security." Anderson struggled to reconcile the timid technician he knew with the operative Blackwood described. It seemed impossible that the quiet, nervous woman who jumped at loud noises could be responsible for the precision eliminations he had witnessed throughout the attack. Yet as he reflected on Wells' behavior over the past months, certain inconsistencies began to make sense. Her exceptional technical abilities, her attention to detail, the odd moments when she seemed more aware of her surroundings than her demeanor would suggest. "I didn't believe her," Anderson said quietly. "When she warned me about Hayes and the attack, I dismissed her concerns." Blackwood's expression softened slightly. "Hayes was very good at his job, Captain. Don't blame yourself for being deceived by a professional." Medical teams from Blackwood's force were now moving through the base, treating wounded Alpha Squad personnel with the same care they showed their own. Other teams were securing evidence and intelligence from the fallen infiltrators. "What happens now?" Anderson asked. "Now," Blackwood replied, "we clean this up. The official story will be that Alpha Base repelled a terrorist attack with minimal casualties. Certain details will be classified, including Wells's true role and the involvement of my organization. And Hayes will disappear into the system. The intelligence he provides will help us dismantle what remains of Zakharov's network." Anderson nodded slowly, recognizing the pragmatic necessity of the arrangement, even if it left him with reservations. As a military man, he understood that some operations required deniability. "I want to see Wells," he said, "to thank her." Blackwood considered the request. "That may be possible once she's stabilized. Her injuries are serious but not life-threatening." As the sun rose fully over Alpha Base, illuminating the destruction in harsh desert light, Anderson found himself reevaluating everything he thought he knew about his command. The quiet technician who had seemed so insignificant had been the most valuable asset on his base, and he had never suspected. It was a humbling realization for a career military officer who prided himself on reading people accurately. Sometimes it seemed the most dangerous individuals were those who appeared the least threatening. It was a lesson Anderson wouldn't forget. In a medical helicopter above the Nevada desert, Sarah Wells fought her way back to consciousness. The pain in her side had been dulled by medication, but her mind remained sharp enough to process her surroundings. Medical equipment beeped steadily, monitoring her vital signs as the helicopter sped toward a secure medical facility. A doctor checked her IV line, making adjustments to the flow rate of whatever medication was keeping the worst of the pain at bay. Sarah tried to speak, finding her throat dry and her voice weak. "Blackwood." The doctor glanced at her, surprised to find her conscious. "General Blackwood is still at the base, Ms. Wells. He'll join you at the facility later." Sarah nodded slightly, conserving her energy. The immediate crisis was over, but the implications would resonate for years to come. Her cover was blown. Zakharov was dead, but his organization remained, at least in part. And they knew who she was now, her connection to her father and to Blackwood. The Ghost Protocol identity that had protected her for years was compromised. She would need to become someone new, someone different from both the timid technician she had portrayed and the lethal operative she had revealed herself to be. As the helicopter continued its journey, Sarah found herself in the liminal space between identities. Sarah Wells was effectively dead, her cover destroyed in the battle at Alpha Base. Who would emerge from this transformation remained to be seen. For the first time in 20 years since the day her father was murdered, before her eyes, Sarah felt a sense of possibility rather than obligation. The mission that had defined her existence was complete. Zakharov was gone. The immediate threat was neutralized. What remained was a choice, one she had never truly had before. The medication pulled her back toward unconsciousness, but as darkness enveloped her once more, Sarah felt something unexpected. Not peace exactly, but purpose. A clarity of vision that had been obscured by the shadow of vengeance for too long. Blackwood had been right. This wasn't an ending, it was a beginning. The secure medical facility resembled a high-end private hospital rather than a military installation. Located on the outskirts of Las Vegas, but unmarked on any public map, it served the clandestine needs of various government agencies and their contractors. Sarah had been there once before during her initial training with Blackwood, though she had been a visitor then rather than a patient. 3 days had passed since the battle at Alpha Base. Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness as doctors worked to repair the damage caused by Petrov's bullet. The round had torn through her side, miraculously missing vital organs, but causing significant blood loss and tissue damage. She had required 2 surgeries and multiple transfusions before the medical team pronounced her stable. On the morning of the 4th day, Sarah awoke with clarity that had been absent during her previous periods of consciousness. The room was private and comfortable with state-of-the-art medical equipment monitoring her vital signs. Sunlight filtered through partially closed blinds, casting patterns across the pristine floor. She took inventory of her condition with the methodical precision Blackwood had taught her. Pain in her side dull but persistent beneath the medication. Weakness in her limbs from blood loss and inactivity. Slight dizziness when she attempted to shift position. Overall, better than expected, considering the circumstances. The door opened quietly and James Blackwood entered. Despite his 79 years, he moved with the deliberate grace of a man half his age, his posture military straight. The events at Alpha Base seemed to have aged him little, though Sarah noticed new lines around his eyes as he approached her bed. "Welcome back to the land of the living," he said, settling into the chair beside her. "The doctors tell me you're expected to make a full recovery." "How long?" Sarah asked, her voice raspy from disuse. "Until you're operational," Blackwood considered. "6 weeks minimum for the wound to heal properly. Another 2 months of physical therapy to regain full function, assuming you want to return to fieldwork." The qualification caught Sarah's attention. In all her years under Blackwood's guidance, the assumption had always been that the mission continued until completion or death. The suggestion that she might choose a different path was unprecedented. "The situation at Alpha Base?" she asked, deflecting the implied question. Blackwood accepted the redirection. "Contained. The official story is that a terrorist cell with ties to Russian extremists attempted to breach the facility but was repelled by base security. 17 Alpha Squad personnel killed, 14 wounded. Captain Anderson has been commended for his leadership during the crisis." And the truth, classified at the highest levels, Zakharov's death has been confirmed through DNA analysis, though his body will never officially be found. Hayes is being held at a Black Site facility providing information on the remaining elements of the Black Eagle organization. Sarah processed this information, weighing its implications. In my role, officially communications specialist Sarah Wells was killed in action defending Alpha Base. Her body was recovered and returned to her non-existent family for a private burial. The news that she was officially dead did not surprise Sarah. It was standard procedure when a deep cover operative was compromised. What did surprise her was the lack of immediate directives for her next assignment. "What happens now?" she asked, meeting Blackwood's gaze directly. The old man studied her for a moment before responding. "That depends on you, Sarah. Zakharov is dead. The immediate threat to the missile defense codes has been neutralized. The mission your father began 20 years ago is complete." "But Black Eagle still exists," Sarah pointed out. "Zakharov's lieutenants will reorganize. The threat remains." "True," Blackwood acknowledged, "but that doesn't have to be your fight anymore. You've earned the right to choose your next path." The concept was foreign to Sarah. Since the age of 15, her life had been defined by a single purpose: prepare to confront Zakharov and protect what her father had died defending. Now, with that mission accomplished, she found herself in uncharted territory. "What options do I have?" she asked, genuinely uncertain. Blackwood leaned forward, his expression serious. "Several. You could accept a new identity and leave this life behind entirely. We would provide the necessary resources for you to build a civilian existence anywhere in the world." The offer was tempting in its simplicity, a normal life free from the constant vigilance and deception that had defined her existence for so long. But Sarah knew herself too well to believe she could simply walk away. "Alternatively," Blackwood continued, "you could transition to an analytical role within the agency. Your field experience and technical skills would be invaluable in a strategic capacity." A desk job, safe, secure, and utterly unsuited to the person Sarah had become. She had been trained as a weapon, honed through years of discipline and sacrifice. The thought of analyzing field reports rather than generating them held little appeal. "Or," Blackwood said, his voice softening slightly, "you could continue as a field operative under a new identity. The Ghost Protocol program still exists and your skills are too valuable to lose entirely." This last option felt most familiar, a continuation of the path she had walked for years. Yet even this held a note of uncertainty now. Without Zakharov and her father's legacy driving her forward, would the mission hold the same meaning? "I need time," Sarah said finally. Blackwood nodded, unsurprised. "Of course, focus on your recovery first. The decision can wait." He rose to leave but paused at the door. "There's someone else who wants to see you if you're feeling up to it." Sarah raised an eyebrow in question. "Captain Anderson," Blackwood clarified. "He's been quite persistent about speaking with you. I've kept him at bay until now, but perhaps it would provide some closure for both of you." The suggestion was unexpected. Sarah had never considered that her cover being blown would lead to direct interactions with those she had deceived. The prospect was uncomfortable but intriguing. "Send him in," she decided. Blackwood nodded and departed. A few minutes later, the door opened again to admit Richard Anderson. The captain looked different out of uniform, more approachable in civilian clothes, though his military bearing remained evident in his posture. "Specialist Wells," he began, then caught himself. Though I suppose that was never really your name, was it? It was one of them, Sarah replied neutrally. Anderson approached her bedside, his expression a complex mixture of emotions. I want to thank you for what you did at Alpha Base. Without your intervention, we would have been completely overrun. The entire squad would have been lost. I was doing my job, Captain. A job I never knew you had. Anderson's tone held a hint of accusation beneath the gratitude. All those months you were on my base under false pretenses, using your position to pursue another agenda entirely. Sarah met his gaze steadily. My mission was to protect the Echelon facility and the missile defense codes. Our objectives aligned perfectly, Captain. I never compromised Alpha Squad's security. I enhanced it. Anderson considered this. You tried to warn me about Hayes, about the attack. I dismissed your concerns. Yes. The simple acknowledgement hung in the air between them. No accusation, no absolution, just a statement of fact. How did you know? Anderson asked finally. What did you see that I missed? Sarah weighed how much to reveal. Anderson had the necessary clearance to know some, but not all of the truth. Hayes asked too many specific questions about security protocols. His interest in the communication systems was inconsistent with his role. And when I mentioned certain code words associated with Sakharov's organization, he reacted subtly but definitively. And I missed all of it, Anderson said, the self-recrimination evident in his voice. Hayes was a professional captain. He had been preparing his cover for years before infiltrating Alpha Squad. Don't blame yourself for being deceived by an expert. The echo of Blackwood's earlier words seemed to register with Anderson. He nodded slowly, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. What will you do now? Blackwood mentioned you are officially dead. I'm considering my options, Sarah replied, surprised at her own honesty. Anderson studied her, seeing for the first time the person behind the carefully constructed facade. You know, I never really knew you. The quiet technician who jumped at shadows was a complete fiction. Wasn't she? A necessary fiction, Sarah corrected, but not a complete one. Explain. Sarah hesitated, unaccustomed to revealing anything genuine about herself. Yet something about the current circumstances, the completion of her mission, her official death, the uncertain future ahead, made candor seem appropriate. The skills are real, she said finally. The training, the technical knowledge, the tactical capabilities. The persona was exaggerated to avoid scrutiny, but the foundation was authentic. Anderson nodded, accepting this partial glimpse behind the curtain. For what it's worth, I wish I had known who you really were. We might have worked well together. The sentiment was unexpected, and Sarah found herself without a practiced response. Perhaps, she acknowledged simply. Anderson seemed to sense her discomfort with the personal turn of the conversation. He straightened, reverting to a more professional demeanor. I should let you rest. My new assignment begins next week, and there's much to prepare. New assignment? Sarah inquired, genuinely curious. Pentagon desk job, Anderson replied with a wry smile. Apparently surviving a terrorist attack earns you a promotion even if you were completely blindsided by it. I'll be advising on base security protocols moving forward. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. The man who had failed to detect a traitor in his midst would now help shape security procedures for military installations across the country. You'll do well, Sarah said, surprising herself with the sincerity in her voice. You've learned the hard way what to look for. That makes your insight valuable. Anderson accepted the assessment with a nod. Goodbye, specialist, or whoever you are now. Goodbye, Captain. After Anderson departed, Sarah was left alone with her thoughts. The encounter had been illuminating in ways she hadn't anticipated. For years, she had maintained a clear separation between her cover identity and her true capabilities. The experience of being seen simultaneously as both Sarah Wells, the technician, and the nameless operative who had eliminated 21 hostiles was oddly disorienting. As evening fell, Sarah drifted into sleep, her dreams for once free of the nightmares that had haunted her since childhood. Instead, she dreamed of possibilities of paths diverging before her, like roads on a map, each leading to a different future. For the first time in 20 years, Sarah Wells dreamed of choices. The physical recovery progressed more quickly than the doctors had anticipated. By the second week, Sarah was walking short distances unassisted, her natural resilience and years of physical conditioning accelerating the healing process. By the fourth week, she had begun modified training exercises to rebuild the strength lost during her convalescence. Blackwood visited regularly, bringing updates on the ongoing dismantling of Zakharov's network based on intelligence extracted from Hayes and other captured operatives. The picture that emerged was both encouraging and concerning. We've identified three major cells operating in Western Europe, Blackwood explained during one such visit. Two have already been neutralized by local authorities working with our intelligence. The third is proving more elusive. Sarah listened attentively, absorbing the information with professional interest while maintaining emotional distance. These were operations she would normally have been involved in, missions that would have been her responsibility. Now she was merely an observer, neither civilian nor active operative, existing in a liminal space between identities. "What about North America?" she asked. Blackwood's expression turned grave. "That's where things get complicated." Hayes revealed the existence of a sleeper cell operating somewhere on the East Coast, but his knowledge was deliberately limited. Compartmentalization of information was one of Zakharov's standard protocols. What was the cell's purpose, according to Hayes? "Contingency plan," Blackwood replied. "If Zakharov's primary operation failed, this group would activate to execute a secondary mission," which was unknown. Hayes wasn't privy to those details, but given Zakharov's fixation on missile defense capabilities, we can make an educated guess. Sarah nodded slowly. "They'll target a different access point to the missile defense network, perhaps a less secure facility or a key individual with clearance. That's our assessment as well. We've enhanced security at all relevant installations and placed potentially vulnerable personnel under surveillance. But without more specific intelligence, it's a waiting game." As Blackwood prepared to leave, he hesitated before sharing one final piece of information. "There's been a development you should know about. A message was intercepted 2 days ago, originating from what we believe is the East Coast cell. It was encoded using Department 16 protocols." Sarah felt a familiar tension settle in her muscles. In the content, once decrypted, it consisted of a single line, "The daughter of Wells' lives." The implications were immediate and chilling. Despite her official death, someone had discovered that Sarah had survived the battle at Alpha Base. Worse, they had identified her connection to her father, suggesting the breach of information went beyond what could have been observed during the attack. "Hayes," she suggested. Blackwood shook his head. "He's been in isolation since his capture. No communication in or out." "Then they have another source," Sarah concluded. "Someone with access to classified information about the Ghost Protocol program or my specific training." "It appears so. We're investigating potential leaks, but the message suggests the East Coast cell may have a new primary target." Sarah understood immediately. "Me." "Yes, by eliminating Zakharov, you've positioned yourself as a high-value target for what remains of his organization. Revenge is a powerful motivator, Barum, especially for those who may have been personally loyal to him." The news should have been alarming, but Sarah found herself reacting with something closer to clarity. The uncertainty that had clouded her thinking since completing her mission was suddenly gone, replaced by the familiar focus that came with a concrete threat. "This changes things," she said simply. Blackwood nodded. "It does. The option of walking away completely is no longer viable, at least not until this threat is neutralized. You would be too vulnerable operating without support. I need to be part of the response team." Sarah stated not a request but a declaration. "Are you sure you're still recovering?" "My wound is healing well. I can be field-ready within 2 weeks." Blackwood studied her with the assessing gaze she remembered from her training days. "This isn't your fight anymore, Sarah. You've done your part. We have other operatives who can handle this threat." "It became my fight when they made me their target," Sarah countered. "Besides, I have more experience with Zakharov's organization and methods than any of your active operatives. That makes me an asset." Blackwood didn't immediately agree, but Sarah could see the tactical calculation running behind his eyes. She was right, and he knew it. Her intimate knowledge of Zakharov's operational patterns and Department 16 protocols made her uniquely qualified to anticipate the East Coast cell's actions. 2 weeks of intensive rehabilitation," he said finally, "followed by a complete medical and psychological evaluation. If you're cleared on both counts, you will join the task force in an advisory capacity initially." It wasn't everything Sarah wanted, but it was a start. Agreed. The 2 weeks passed in a blur of physical therapy, weapons refresher courses, and intelligence briefings on what was known about the East Coast cell. At the end of this period, Sarah underwent comprehensive evaluations to assess her readiness for field operations. The physical examination confirmed what she already knew: her wound was healing well, with minimal impact on her operational capabilities. The psychological evaluation was more nuanced, noting her exceptional focus, but expressing concern about potential reaction formation using mission engagement to avoid processing trauma. Nevertheless, Sarah was cleared for limited field operations. Within days, she was on a private jet to Boston, where the task force had established a base of operations. Her new identity, Anna Clark, security consultant specializing in threat assessment, felt strange yet oddly fitting. Anna was confident, competent, and professional. She lacked Sarah Wells' meek demeanor, but stopped well short of revealing the true capabilities of the operative behind the mask. A middle ground perhaps reflecting Sarah's own evolving sense of self. The operations center was located in a renovated warehouse, its exterior maintaining the appearance of a tech startup, while concealing a fully equipped tactical command post beneath. Thomas Reeves, the task force commander, was a former Delta operator with an impressive record. He greeted Sarah with professional courtesy and immediately put her expertise to work. The team had identified 3 potential locations for the East Coast Cell's base of operations: a tech consulting firm in Cambridge, an import-export business near the harbor, and a former medical clinic now functioning as a wellness center. Based on her knowledge of Department 16 protocols, Sarah quickly confirmed that the tech firm operating under the name Quantum Solutions was the most likely primary location. After a week of surveillance and intelligence gathering, Sarah's assessment proved accurate. The cell was preparing for what appeared to be a cyber attack against defense infrastructure, possibly targeting the missile defense network through a backdoor rather than direct access to the codes. A covert operation to gather direct intelligence was authorized. Sarah would accompany a team tasked with accessing physical documentation at Quantum Solutions, while another team extracted data from the company's servers. The operation was scheduled for 100 hours, when the building would be minimally occupied. Sarah and her team operatives, Mason and Teller, successfully infiltrated the target through the roof access, moving silently toward the executive offices where critical documentation would likely be stored. The first warning sign came when they discovered the main office door ajar, the room already searched by unknown parties. Behind a concealed wall panel, they found a small safe containing plans for a cyber attack targeting a missile defense facility in Maine. The documentation was suspiciously accessible and complete, too perfect. "This is wrong," Sarah whispered to her teammates. "Department 6 never keeps operational details this accessible. This is a plant disinformation." Before they could react further, the building's fire alarm activated and security systems engaged, trapping them inside. A standard Department 16 containment protocol designed to capture intruders. When they discovered explosive devices rigged at their planned exit routes, Sarah's suspicions were confirmed. They had walked into a trap. "You two get out through the maintenance shaft," Sarah instructed Mason and Teller, pointing to an HVAC access panel. "I'll create a diversion to help Team 1. Despite their protests, Sarah moved back into the main office space. The East Coast cell had set a trap, but they had miscalculated in one crucial aspect. They had no idea who they were really dealing with. Sarah made her way toward the server room where Team 1 was pinned down. Moving silently through the darkened hallways, she eliminated 2 security personnel without raising alarm. When she reached the server room, she found 3 armed men outside the door preparing to breach. With methodical efficiency, Sarah neutralized all 3 guards using the close-quarters combat techniques Blackwood had taught her. The sound of the fire alarm masked any noise from the brief struggle. "Team 1 status," she whispered into her comm unit. "Still secure," came the response. "But we're detecting an active data purge. They're wiping the servers remotely." "Can you stop it?" "Negative. We need direct access to the main control terminal on the top floor." Sarah considered her options. The top floor would be the most heavily guarded area, likely where the cell leadership was located. Going there alone was a significant risk, but the alternative was mission failure. "Maintain position," she instructed. "I'm headed to the control center." Using the building's service corridors and maintenance shafts, Sarah made her way to the top floor. The training that had allowed her to eliminate 50 attackers at Alpha Base served her equally well here as she moved unseen through a building full of enemies. When she reached the executive suite that housed the main control terminal, Sarah paused to assess the situation. Through the glass partition, she could see three individuals, a man and woman working at computer terminals, and a second man older with silver hair standing by the window speaking on a satellite phone. The older man's posture and bearing triggered immediate recognition. Though she had never seen him before, Sarah knew she was looking at someone trained under Department 16 protocols, likely Zakharov's second-in-command or protege. With practiced silence, Sarah breached the room through an adjacent air duct. She disabled the woman at the first terminal with a precision strike before either man could react. The younger man reached for his weapon, but found Sarah's already trained on him. "Don't," she advised softly. The older man turned from the window, his expression shifting from surprise to calculated assessment. "You must be the daughter of Wells," he said, his accent distinctly Russian, though less pronounced than Zakharov's had been. "I am Vladimir Sokolov. Your father and I were acquainted." "Step away from the window," Sarah instructed, keeping her weapon trained on the younger man while maintaining awareness of Sokolov's position. Sokolov complied with unhurried grace. "I knew Zakharov had underestimated you. He believed the child who witnessed her father's death would be broken by the experience. I disagreed." "Stop the data purge," Sarah demanded, indicating the terminal with a slight nod. "I'm afraid that's not possible. The process is automated and irreversible." Sokolov smiled thinly. "But that was never our primary objective. The cyber attack plans you found were indeed disinformation, as you correctly deduced. Your real target. You, of course." Sokolov's eyes held a predatory gleam. "Zakharov was fixated on the missile defense codes, but I always understood the true value lay elsewhere. The Ghost Protocol program represents the culmination of decades of intelligence work, a methodology for creating perfect operatives who can disappear in plain sight." Sarah kept her expression neutral, despite the revelation. Sokolov wasn't just after revenge. He wanted the secrets of the program that had created her. "And you believe I'll simply tell you how it works?" Sokolov laughed softly. "No, but your brain will. The human mind holds patterns that can be extracted and analyzed. The right combination of drugs, psychological pressure, and neural mapping can reveal everything, even secrets you don't consciously know you possess." The implications were chilling. Sokolov wasn't planning to kill her. He intended to capture and dismantle her, psychologically extracting the methodologies Blackwood had used to transform a traumatized child into the perfect operative. "That won't happen," Sarah stated with quiet certainty. "It already is happening," Sokolov replied. "This building has been sealed. My team is converging on this location, and your extraction teams have been neutralized." Sarah's comm unit confirmed part of his claim with an automated distress signal from Team 1. But Sokolov had made a critical miscalculation, the same one Zakharov had made at Alpha Base. He believed he was dealing with a standard operative rather than someone specifically trained to counter Department 16 tactics. "You've planned well," Sarah acknowledged, "but so did Zakharov." Before Sokolov could respond, the glass window behind him shattered as a tactical team rappelled from the roof. In the split second of distraction, Sarah eliminated the younger operative with a single shot, then dove for cover as gunfire erupted from multiple directions. Through the chaos, she recognized a familiar figure leading the tactical team, Blackwood himself, weapon in hand, despite his age moving with the efficiency of a man who had spent decades in the field. "Quite the rescue, old friend," Sokolov called out, taking cover behind a reinforced desk. "Just like Kandahar in '89. Except this time I'm not letting you walk away, Vladimir," Blackwood replied, his voice calm, despite the intensity of the situation. Sarah moved to flank Sokolov's position while Blackwood kept him distracted. The exchange confirmed what she had suspected. Blackwood and Sokolov had history, perhaps even as counterparts on opposite sides of the Cold War. Sokolov seemed to sense her approach, shifting his attention and weapon toward her new position. The momentary division of focus was all Blackwood needed. His shot caught Sokolov in the shoulder, spinning the Russian away from his cover. Sarah closed the distance in an instant, disarming Sokolov with a technique he himself had likely helped develop decades earlier. The irony wasn't lost on the Russian, whose laugh turned into a grimace of pain. "Well played," he conceded as Sarah secured his hands. "But this is merely one move in a much longer game." "A game you've just lost," Blackwood stated, approaching with weapon still raised. Sokolov smiled despite his wound. "Have I? The daughter of Wells lives, and now everyone knows it. The myth of the Ghost Protocol has been exposed. Others will come, James. Others who seek what you've created. Let them, Sarah said quietly. They'll find me waiting. The extraction from Cambridge was executed with precision. Sokolov and three surviving members of the East Coast cell were transported to a secure facility for interrogation, while the task force secured and sanitized the Quantum Solutions offices, removing all evidence of both the cell's operations and their own intervention. Sarah rode in silence during the journey to the secondary safe house, processing the implications of Sokolov's words. She had eliminated Zakharov to complete her father's mission, but in doing so, he had transformed from a ghost in the system to a target. The very skills that made her effective had become valuable intelligence that others would seek to obtain by force if necessary. Blackwood joined her in the safe house's small conference room after ensuring the perimeter was secure. He moved more stiffly than before the night's exertions, having taken a toll even on his remarkable constitution. You shouldn't have been there, Sarah said without preamble. Field operations at your age are ill-advised. Blackwood finished for her, yet sometimes necessary. He settled into a chair across from her. Sokolov and I have history. I needed to see this through personally. He called you old friend. A deliberate choice of words. We were never friends, but we were counterparts for nearly 2 decades. Department 16 and our own Ghost protocol developed in parallel, each responding to the other's innovations. In a way, he helped shape the program that created you. The revelation added a new layer of complexity to Sarah's understanding of her own origins. That's why he wants the program's secrets. Partly, Blackwood acknowledged, but there's something more fundamental at work. The world Sokolov and I operated in had clear divisions: East versus West communism versus capitalism. Those divisions gave meaning to what we did, justified the methods we employed. And now those clear lines have blurred. National intelligence agencies compete with private military contractors, criminal organizations, and ideological extremists. The old rules no longer apply, and men like Sokolov find themselves adrift, seeking purpose in a world that has moved beyond them. Sarah considered this. Is that true for you as well? The question hung in the air between them, more personal than any she had asked before. Blackwood's expression softened slightly. Perhaps. I've spent 50 years in service to a cause that has changed almost beyond recognition. The Ghost Protocol was designed for a specific type of conflict that no longer exists, and yet the skills it cultivates remain necessary in this new landscape, which explains why you've continued the program despite its official discontinuation. Yes, Blackwood studied her with the assessing gaze she knew so well. But the program needs to evolve just as you have. The ghosts of tomorrow can't be created through the same methods we used with you. And what methods would those be? Sarah asked, genuinely curious about how Blackwood envisioned the future. Less trauma, more choice, he replied simply. Your transformation began with your father's murder, a crucible that forged something remarkable, but at tremendous cost. Future operatives should be volunteers who understand what they're committing to, not children shaped by tragedy. The assessment struck Sarah as both accurate and surprisingly self-critical coming from Blackwood. For the first time, she wondered if he harbored regrets about the way he had guided her development despite its operational success. What happens to Sokolov? She asked, shifting the conversation back to immediate concerns. He'll be interrogated, then likely traded in a prisoner exchange with the Russians. Despite his freelance status, he still holds value to Moscow. And the knowledge he has about me, about the Ghost Protocol, will be contained, Blackwood assured her, but not eliminated entirely. As Sokolov said, the myth has been exposed. We need to adapt to that new reality. Sarah nodded, understanding the implications. So what now? For me? Now, Blackwood said, rising from his chair with a slight wince. You make that choice I mentioned back in Las Vegas, but with more information than you had before. The East Coast cell has been neutralized, but there will be others, Sarah noted. Yes, and they'll be looking for both of us. The question is whether you want to confront that threat from within the program or forge a different path entirely. Sarah considered her options with the clarity that came from complete information. The battle at Alpha Base had completed her father's mission. The operation in Boston had demonstrated that her skills remained essential in a changing world. But the cost of those skills, the isolation, the perpetual vigilance, the disconnection from normal human experience was substantial. I need to see this through, she decided finally. Help dismantle what remains of Zakharov's network. But afterward, Blackwood prompted when she didn't continue, I want to help reshape the Ghost Protocol. Create something that achieves the same objectives without requiring operatives to sacrifice everything that makes them human. Blackwood's expression revealed nothing, but Sarah could sense his approval. That would be valuable. Your perspective as both product and architect of the program would be unique. Not as valuable as field operations. Different, Blackwood clarified. But no less essential. The world is changing, Sarah. Our methods must change with it. The conversation was interrupted by a secure communication alert. Blackwood checked the message, his expression growing more serious. Sokolov is talking, he informed her. There's another cell based in Berlin, apparently operating independently from the East Coast group, but with similar objectives. When do we leave? Sarah asked, already calculating mission parameters in her mind. Not we, Blackwood corrected. I'm recused from European operations after tonight's deviation from protocol. Reeves will lead the Berlin mission with support from our NATO counterparts. And me, you, Blackwood said with unexpected finality, are taking 2 weeks of actual medical leave. Doctor's orders, which in this case I'm inclined to enforce. Your performance tonight was exemplary, but has likely set back your recovery by at least a month. Sarah started to protest, but stopped when she registered the genuine concern in Blackwood's eyes. It wasn't just about her physical recovery. It was about giving her space to process everything that had happened since Alpha Base. 2 weeks, she conceded. Then I want to be briefed on Berlin. Agreed. In the meantime, there's a cabin in Montana that might provide a suitable environment for both recovery and reflection. Secure, isolated, with excellent sightlines in all directions. Sarah recognized the location immediately, the same facility where she had trained as a teenager, returning to where it all began. Sometimes, Blackwood said with the ghost of a smile, that's the only way to chart a new course forward. 2 days later, Sarah stood on the porch of the isolated cabin, watching the sun set over the Montana wilderness. The facility had changed little in the years since her training, though it now housed only a skeleton staff rather than the full complement of instructors and support personnel she remembered. The solitude was unfamiliar after months of living on a military base surrounded by others. Yet it wasn't unwelcome. For the first time in her adult life, Sarah had space to consider not just her next mission, but her future in broader terms. Inside the cabin, a secure terminal connected her to the agency's intelligence network. Blackwood had granted her unprecedented access, allowing her to review not just operational files, but the theoretical foundations of the Ghost Protocol itself, documents that outlined the psychological methodologies used to create operatives like herself. As she studied these materials, Sarah began to see patterns, understand decisions that had shaped her training, and recognize alternatives that might have achieved similar results with less psychological cost. She started making notes initially for her own clarity, but eventually developing into a framework for program evolution. On the 10th day of her retreat, a secure message arrived from Blackwood Berlin cell neutralized. Reeves reports minimal casualties. Your insights on Department 16 protocols proved invaluable. When you return, there will be much to discuss regarding the future of the program. The past is complete. The future awaits your contribution. B. Sarah sat with the message for a long time, understanding its significance. Blackwood wasn't just acknowledging her tactical value. He was offering her a partnership in reshaping the program that had defined them both. The ghost that had moved unseen through Alpha Base, eliminating 50 enemies without hesitation, was still part of her. But it was no longer all of her. She was becoming something more complex, an operative who understood both the necessity of her skills and their human cost, who could both execute missions and question the frameworks that defined them. As night fell over the Montana wilderness, Sarah Wells, or whoever she would become, next watched the stars emerge above the silent forest. Her father's mission was complete. Zakharov was gone. The immediate threats had been neutralized. What remained was a choice not between continuing as an operative or walking away entirely, but between remaining a product of the Ghost Protocol or becoming its architect. Between accepting the methods that had created her or reshaping them for those who would follow. For someone who had spent her life defined by a single purpose, the possibility of defining her own path forward was both terrifying and exhilarating. But Sarah had never shied away from the unknown. After all, that was where ghosts did their best work.